right. We
All
are
right.
live. What's going on, Delilah?
What's going on, Marcus? Welcome to another episode of Marketwise Radio número cuatro.
I know. I know. I feel like with all the travel I've been doing, it's like every time I get back on camera with you, I'm pretty pumped.
Yes. So you and
And
I,
you.
yeah, me too. We both just came back from our first conference of 2025. You were in Georgia. I was in Austin, Texas for IMB.
hmm
And we'll go ahead and dive in. You and I were chatting it up. There was an economist for the state of Georgia at your
Yes. Yep.
conference. Let's talk about optimism and it being high.
And I felt bad for this guy because he got no love. He was up there with all of his charts and all of his graphs, and
Really?
he was such an economist. He was like, this is the quiet, super smart dude, but like the quiet spreadsheets and
Yeah.
charts and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
I got out of it what I needed to, which I thought was cool. It's just, I literally just flew back up, 4:30 a.m.
Mhm.
up, flying back this morning and had some
Okay.
meetings in the city. So I was thinking about topics for the show today, and the two things that stuck out to me were number one, you had some interesting comments about IMB, and
Yeah.
I had some interesting thoughts that like kind of split my brain in two in terms of what's going to happen this year and what people are thinking in the market. So that's here's the big picture that I wanted to talk about today.
Mhm.
Optimism and threats, right? So it's like people are optimistic and there's these kind of nasty threats to that optimism that are just kind of like skating by under the surface.
Okay.
Maybe not under the surface. They're definitely all over the surface, but I think they're worth talking about.
Well, let's go ahead and dive in because obviously we were text messaging while we were traveling together, and we kind of were like, "Hey, what is the vibe at your event? What's the vibe at my event?" So optimism is high, but also there's like the unknown. So go ahead
Yeah.
and yeah.
So there's two different points that I took this from, right? So
Mhm.
I just read an article today it's called the Credit Union Times. It's where I read
Okay.
news about the credit union world and credit union bank execs. It's saying that they both have their highest reported levels of optimism since 2017. And I'll use this as part of the blog, but the part that was being discussed at the conference,
Mhm.
and by the way, you mentioned like what was the vibe out at IMB.
Yeah.
The vibe at the Georgia Bankers, I'm part of the Georgia Bankers Association, so the GBA meeting. This was like an economic. I mean, they were all having a blast. These guys, they know how to have a good time, so they were pumped no matter what.
Okay. It's the beginning of the new year. So good for them. Okay.
But the chart that the economist brought to the table, which he was actually bringing to regulators, and I don't know if it was just regulators, but it was partly regulators and some committee meeting in the coming week.
Hmm.
But it was the Community Bank Sentiment Index, and it's this fancy way of measuring a bunch of different data points. Basically, sentiment. University of Michigan does one that talks about consumer sentiment, and they've been doing it forever, like 40 years. It's great to to gauge individual sentiment. I bet you could have predicted the presidential election solely based on how not solely, but in part based on consumer sentiment. That was one thing that I know. Don't raise your eyebrow. There's a reason I'm saying that.
We saw
There was, yeah, no, I know. There was another speaker, a political
it.
consultant who is very active in Georgia politics that spoke right after, made a really good point. And his point was that people tend to vote out the people in power if they feel like the country is going in the wrong direction, whether it's objectively true or not, right?
Okay.
So I look at this chart and I'll put it up in this week's blog that we're going to put out.
Okay, cool.
And it shows the community bank sentiment index going down, 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 starting in 2021 as economic conditions deteriorate. So 2021 comes around and this thing is just tanking. It bottoms out to its lowest point, which is like in the negative part of this thing. I'm going to send this to you real quick
Okay,
so you
cool.
can take a look at it. I'm going to put it in the chat here.
Okay.
But it bottoms out in like 2023 to its lowest point in probably years, right? And then miraculously, as 2023 goes on, 2024 comes and goes. all of a sudden you see this chart just skyrocket to levels that haven't been seen since like 2019.
Okay.
So clearly people are pretty pumped about the election. Whether your politics agree with it or not, it's irrelevant. I'm just saying this is what the sentiment says. And this is being echoed all over the place, is that sentiment's high, right? People are optimistic, which is really funny because what did you tell me when you were out at IMB? What was the vibe out there?
Well, for me in Austin, it was like if you're still standing, it wasn't greatly attended, but the people that were there were like, if you're still standing currently in the beginning of 2025, like that's it. Like you've somewhat are doing something right and you've made it because so many people have not made it this far. And that goes for companies all across the mortgage, real estate, financial services. So many people have closed their doors and people have lost jobs and they just cannot I just it's not working for them. They're having to leave the industry, and the people who are currently here still standing. And if you're making like if you're in the green, kudos to you because you're doing something right. Like yeah, and they also said 2025 will be a reflection of 2024.
So not great vibes. That's what you're telling me. The vibes were not extremely high. Okay,
They
got
weren't. They weren't. I think people were. I mean, I like the fact that your economists, well, for the charts, they always have charts. They're the cutest. But um I like that they're optimistic. I like the optimistic part of it. I think we should always be optimistic and have faith and everything like that. But I know that, like you mentioned, there's an unknown. There's like a big question mark, right? Because it hasn't been. It's been like 2 weeks or whatever, less than 2 weeks that this new administration has taken over. Now, a lot has happened, but
My wife's very busy.
yeah, a lot has
Good.
happened. It's like a telenovela. Telenovela is a Spanish soap opera. And so
I live in Miami, sister. Don't you have to tell me what a telenovela is. Come on now. That's playing out in my backyard. I mean, I keep seeing these posts about ice raids every day, but that's not the topic here.
no, it's not. The point is that there is a question mark. People do not know what's to come, right? So they're just staying put. They're just not, they don't know how to move. They don't know what direction they're going. And a lot of that unknown creates like sometimes a fear. And so it's just one of those things and you know, housing market, people are just not, they're staying put. They're really staying put. And I told you that while we were, communicating at our conferences. Mhm.
Yeah, well, they're staying put for a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason is that basically the Fed, our lovely government, who was in charge of printing all that money,
Yep.
which I'm always going to go back to. They've actually had a positive effect on the housing market, whether people want to see it yet or not. It's headed in the right direction, which is prices seem to be declining.
A little
It
bit,
seems that
depending
average home prices are going down, right?
depending where it's at. Because
Yeah, yeah. Forget Miami. I mean, forget maybe parts of Florida like
yeah.
Orlando and Miami, because
Mhm.
I don't know if prices are necessarily like going down here. Um, but I can definitely say that on average, on a big picture level, they're moving downward, which
Mhm.
needs to happen, right? Because that's a big. In order for the Fed to drop the federal funds rate, which ends up affecting every rate, hopefully the
Mhm.
Treasury yields also, you're looking at a component of inflation which has to come down, which is housing prices, right? So there's like a rental equivalency that they use to measure homeowner payments toward housing prices. That was actually a term I just learned from the economist I was listening to him the other day. But there's optimism. Okay, so like half of this, the whole point of this conversation is that there's optimism about the future, which seems to not be reflected in the actual mortgage industry, but perhaps just in like economics and the banking world. I don't know.
Yeah, man, it is it's a lot, personally as someone who has a few properties of her own, I see the difference. I have property in Chicago. That has decreased. Truth. I have a couple of them and the value is just not holding.
Mm-hmm.
So versus my house here in Orlando, Florida, I have like apparently a mini mansion.
Yeah,
Who'd have
same.
thought? Like, right? I can't believe that my property that I bought just a few years ago is pretty much valued at $500,000. Like, it's just bananas. And I don't see that going down, to be honest with you. I definitely stay on my neighborhood. I'm on the east side of Orlando. I'm like the
Right.
Jeffersons.
Okay. Yeah, 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 yeah. I Orlando's like a big soup to me. I don't really.
It's like a what?
It's just like a big soup. It all mixes together. It's very hard for me to get my head around like what's what and what's where.
Yeah. And then there's Tampa. Like Tampa's just crazy, crazy expensive,
Yeah,
actually. And then the number one county, I think we might have touched at this last is it Polk County? Which
probably.
county?
It's probably one of the last affordable places to build or
I mean,
buy.
it's just it was like the number one county that people are moving to in the country. It wasn't just in the state of Florida. It was literally that county, and which is not within an hour from me. So people are, it's just, it's different market. And remember, like we mentioned before, baby boomers, which is, the largest generation, they have now all officially entered retirement age. And so nobody ever says, "Oh, I'm retired. I'm going to move to like Oklahoma or I'm going to move to Idaho." Nobody says that. They either want to move to Florida, Texas, or the Gulf, or who knows. And people are flocking here in droves. So,
So beside Florida, there's negative movement, which is positive in home prices, which is good. We need that to happen. People still have to buy.
yep.
So the interesting part, like the kind of counterbalance to all that positive sentiment, except for at IMB, but on like a macro, big picture scale, right? There's these kind of threats that are out there that nobody really knows what's going to happen or how it's all going to shake out. We're talking a couple things: the potential tariffs, which will inevitably affect construction costs, and
Yes.
I mean everything. So we're talking about a squeezed like consumer profile and a big picture that is now going to be hit with increased costs, which inevitably get passed on to the consumer, right? The other thing is, agree with it or not, the immigration stance of the current administration potentially has some, effects on the labor force, and how
Absolutely.
that shakes out if they actually implement stuff on a big scale is
Yeah.
a big question mark. But if I were to just isolate the idea in a bubble and say this is the cause, this is the effect, the cause is like mass deportation and revoking people's
Yeah.
ability to work, things like that. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs or be deported potentially. In my little example bubble here,
Mhm.
and that will obviously negatively
Oh
affect
yeah.
things like
Whether
uh,
whether you whatever side you're on, at the end of the day, that is inevitable. It will affect our labor force. It will affect our builder community,
yeah.
um, especially in the state that we live in. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the number one builder state still in the country is Tennessee. And it was followed then by like, yeah, Tennessee. It was Tennessee. It was. And then it was like Texas and Florida. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know how they're getting around the requirement to do this like I-4 worker citizenship work, right? Like verification. I don't know exactly what it's called, but we just had to do it. I've never been involved in it before, but we just hired
Really?
somebody and I had to get involved with
Wow.
doing the man, what's it called? I forgot. It was like worker I-4 verification, something like that, right? But it like asked for their social security card and or their birth certificate or something like that. But it was more in depth than I've ever seen it, which
Okay.
was really interesting because like I never ever saw somebody ask for that much information on an employee, and it wasn't somebody, it was just our payroll provider, but it was part
Oh,
of like their ability to work verification, I think.
wow. Yeah, it will impact our industry. Whether, like I said, whichever side you're in. So again, it goes kind of falls into it's the unknown, right? We don't know how bad it will impact us. We'll just
Right.
have to kind of wait and see. And, but one of the things we still have to, regardless, the vibe wasn't the greatest, but we still, like, I can't speak for people that I just left in Austin. Um, we still have to promote our industry. Like, our industry
Yeah,
drives the
absolutely.
economy so much. And I sometimes feel like we're not doing a great job with promoting our industry as a whole in a positive light. And I've talked about that so much. Like, it just can't, yeah. It's,
Yeah, what regardless of this is interesting stuff to talk about, but the
Mhm.
bottom line is like no matter what, I still have some amazing clients and
Yeah,
colleagues and friends in the business, and every one of them is trying their hardest every single day to help people,
absolutely.
not just buy and sell their homes, but help change people's lives. And
Yes.
focusing on this stuff is like interesting to think about. It's interesting to know what's going on. We need to know what's going on. It doesn't change our day to day. The day to day still has to be, partner with people that can do a really good job, like us,
Yeah.
Marketwise. If you're looking for a great appraisal management company,
You're
but
the bestest.
that's my shameless plug for the day. If anybody listens to this, but the that means the people that work the hardest are going to still rise to the top because they're going to have to they're going to work just as hard in this market as they would in a raging bull market. So
Yeah.
you know
And I
focusing on that stuff is it's good to think about, but it's not good to like fixate on.
and I'll tell you another thing. People, I call it creativeness. Like, I have to really get into my creative space to also promote my business, your business. You are going to have to, the way the delivery is of your product or services is going to have to change because the way people are absorbing information is changing. Like, people rely on certain marketing tactics that have worked in the past, and that stuff just is not the case. And I'm noticing that people are also just doing different things to get different results, in our industry. We have, because the average age of our industry is like, what is it? Like 50s. I believe you and I are younger, and I think I'm like almost 10 years older than you.
Yeah,
But we're
I'm
on
the
the
baby for
younger,
sure.
yeah, we're on the younger end of it. But they obviously have been doing things a certain way, and that is not the case anymore. For whether you're an appraisal, whether you're in title, whether you're an IMB, whether you're a credit union, for the first time ever, I'm seeing credit unions promote themselves. Like,
Yeah,
marketing, like on TikTok. I've never
that's
seen any
cool.
credit
I love
unions.
that.
Yeah, I've never seen credit unions on like social media. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to see them. So that's definitely a sign of the times that they are having to change things up so that they can be seen in different lights. Absolutely.
Well, it's going to be a wild year, but I think no matter what, keep working hard. Good
Yeah.
things are going to happen. That's the moral of
No,
the story.
man,
And like, if anything else happens or the meteor crashes into Earth, we can't do anything about that at this point.
listen, I'm telling you, if you wake up and if the good Lord gives you breath, you better take that opportunity and run,
Hmm.
do better, get better, and be
Better
better.
use all of it. Amen.
That's what I'm
That's the
telling.
sermon for the day. Marketwise Radio sermon 004.
But seriously, like, you just wake up, you're like, I woke up. Okay, let's do
Like,
this. Because
yeah, let's go cause some hell out there. That's my mentality.
God, but no, you guys, thank you always for tuning in. If you have any questions, you definitely reach out, let us know. All of our contact information is always on, social media and LinkedIn. We're pretty easy to find. And with that, go ahead and end us, take us away,
Yes,
Marcus.
ma'am. Guys, we'll be putting this out as part of our newsletter for the week and our
Yeah.
blog for the week. As always, find us at marketwisevaluation.com or on LinkedIn
Mhm.
or Paper Airplane or however you want to reach out. We will be
Smoke
happy to help.
signals.
Smoke signals. I'm good with that. Thank you, Delilah. Appreciate you coming on.
And we'll talk
All
soon.
right.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.